Welcome to the Bear With Me podcast. On this week's episode, I'm going to be joined by a good friend of mine. Actually, he's one of my best friends in life, Josh. And when I say we've been through it all, I mean it. My bro has been around to see me through multiple transitions in life. I was honored to have him join me on the stage as a groomsman on my wedding day. In our time together, we're going to discuss our understanding of body positivity, talk about the impact it has on our lives, its relevance in Black culture, social media's role in either helping or harming how we see our bodies, and how and why nudism connects to it all. Also, with it being Suicide Prevention Month, I think it's imperative that we have this conversation with Josh being a mental health expert. And so we're going to talk about the importance that mental health plays and how we show up confidently in our skin. This is an episode you don't want to miss. Stay tuned. Bear with me. This is the Bear With Me podcast, and I'm your host, Jay. And who am I? I'm just a 34-year-old Black man in America who just happens to be a nudist. My identity as a Black man and a nudist plays a significant role in how I've come to see the world. I came to find nudism through my journey into body positivity. I found that my experiences were things that many people around me could benefit from hearing. So here we are. Welcome to my world. I think it's critically important to reflect on my journey up until this point in order for you all to understand the impact my past has on where I'm going. So if you've chosen to join me on this journey, I truly appreciate it. And I promise it'll all be worth it. Bear with me. Thank you so much for agreeing to be a guest on the podcast today. I couldn't think of a better person to start this conversation with than somebody who has been an amazing friend, a brother over like the past, 12 years. Welcome to the Bear With Me podcast. We're going to talk about a lot today, but before we get too deep into the conversation, I just want to give you an opportunity to take a moment to say hello to the people and introduce yourself however you feel comfortable.
Hey everybody, I'm Josh, and I am a clinical mental health counselor or therapist. They're interchangeable. I'm a little bit of a nerd here. Like, I love comic books. I am a lover of all anime and things of that nature. I'm also a lover of poetry, and I'm also a skater. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me, though.
Right, a man that wears many hats. Recently, something really big has happened in your life. You want to talk to the people about that?
Yeah, I actually just became a fully licensed counselor about 2-3 weeks ago. Right before my birthday.
Congratulations, bro. Like, I know the journey. I know what you went through, but just for our listeners, can you talk a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, it's been a 5-year journey. 3 years of grad school, 2 tests, and 2 years license work, and also having to pay for supervision. So it's been a journey, been quite the journey.
Hey man, that's crazy to think about, bro. Can you talk to me a little bit about, like, what does it mean when you say you're a fully licensed therapist?
As a fully licensed therapist, so let me give you a little background. So typically, as a provisionally licensed therapist, you're operating underneath somebody's license, right? And so whether that's diagnosing and all that other stuff, you're doing that underneath somebody's license. When it comes to fully licensed, it's just you. You working underneath your license. You can come into practice for yourself. It's just your brand. It's you now. You don't nobody else to depend on but yourself.
So what does the next few years look like for you as a fully licensed therapist? Are you looking to go into your own practice or what?
Yeah, I would say so. It's been such a kind of like a passion of mine that I'm for the community, man. I love us. I love Black people. Like, we are the community, and I feel like that is where my place in therapy works when it comes to groups, events, all the other stuff. So yeah, this is my next couple of years will be dedicated to us in working with us. So
Hey man, that's amazing. Again, congratulations. We're going to take a deep dive into talking about all things mental health, therapy, the benefit of taking time to invest in your mental health. But before we, jump into that, I do have general questions that I tend to ask all guests that agree to do the show. So the first question, and thinking back, do you remember how we met, bro?
Yeah, man. It is absolutely hilarious. So it was at Abundant Life, right? Like the church in St. Louis, Abundant Life Fellowship Church, and I remember us being around a group of people, and we were called Current, right? And so for some odd reason, when I first started coming around, everybody thought I was you. And it was funny because you was like 4 hours away, and I saw a picture of you. I was like, but we don't look nothing alike. So I'm not sure how we keep getting this messed up here.
Yeah, I guess because it was, we were both short and black, because I was getting the same message from 4 hours away, because I was at school at the time, I think, in Kansas City, when Karen had kind of jumped off and started connecting a lot. And again, yeah, you were there, and I kept hearing that, hey man, it's this new dude named Josh. He took your place.
which is so funny because me and you, like, back then, me and you were completely different, which is just like, I don't see how they got that. I mean, I get it now. I get like you guys are short and black, but like personality wise, we were not the same. I don't get it. I don't know, man.
Exactly, man. It's crazy to think that was over 12 years ago, man. So we really been rocking with one another for 12 years, bro.
For sure.
And that's, the crazy thing about it was, again, I think we first met at a random event. I think we called Freedom Friday. And I think,
oh yeah,
what I remember was after the event, you kind of ran up to me and was like, "You Jason, right?" I was like, "Yeah, you must be Josh," because it was kind of instant. Like, people had been talking about us to each other so much that I kind of already knew who you were before we actually like had officially met. But I like, how they say the rest is history. From that moment, it was brothers instantly.
Sure.
So again, man, thank you so much for joining the podcast. We've talked a lot about it offline, but this truly means a lot just to have my brothers support me in this new venture that I'm doing. So the next question, as we kind of stay in the past for a little bit, thinking about your upbringing, what conscious or maybe subconscious lessons were you taught about your body, or maybe just bodies in general?
Ooh, that's a good question. That's a real good question. Surprisingly, I was actually never taught anything about, at least from a parental role. I was never taught anything about my body. Having like a disconnected relationship with my father, things were not necessarily handed down to me like, okay, here's how your body's gonna grow. So I had to learn about my body through the lens of like, and I know we gotta go, this might go deep really quick, but like, I learned it through being envious.
Oh, okay.
Which is,
when you say, okay, so first off, you said, so you didn't really have like an introduction to your body from an education sense as it pertains to your parents. So you said it started with envy. Can you talk to me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think one thing that's very interesting in growing up, and I know it's probably been talked about online, but like, as a kid who grew up the short person in the class, right? Also being, relatively skinny, right? And having dark skin, chocolate skin. It is kind of one of them situations in which you were either made fun of, like you were too skinny, you were so little, all this other stuff. So like, that's what I mean in the terms of like, that's when I became conscious of my body, because I looked at all the other kids and I was like, oh man, he looks a lot bigger than me. And look at me.
Okay, so your first, I guess, set of education was through comparison, which kind of leads us right into the next question. So when you hear the term body positivity, what immediately comes to mind?
Body positivity, the first thing I think honestly is celebrating yourself in the skin that you're in, right? Being confident in whatever shape or form you come in. I think that that's one of the things to be That to me, that's what body positivity means.
I mean, and I think you're right. But kind of, you kind of reflected upon your past experiences, but what role would you say that body positivity plays in your life on a daily? Or does it? Or is it something that you're conscious about?
So I've done that more this summer than I actually ever have, just because I recently started working out. And so, I've been working out for at least like, what, 10 months now. And I've been lifting weights for at least like 7 or 8. And so, watching my body transform, I actually started enjoying how my body looks more in the summertime than I have in the wintertime. So that's the way, like, wearing shirts that fit more has been kind of like a new experience for me.
Okay.
Right. So yeah.
Hey, and via your Instagram pictures, man, hey, you doing something right. You putting that time in the gym, and you should celebrate yourself. And I think that's exactly what body positivity is all about. Like you said, it's about embracing who you are. It's about embracing what you have, how you show up. I hear a lot of people talk about, putting in work in the wintertime so that they can show out in the summertime. But the reality of it is the summer's gonna get whatever body you showed up with. And I think
Truth.
one of the pillars of this podcast is to start to have these conversations with people so that they can embrace their bodies 365 days a year, 366 on a leap year. But no, thank you for
Mhm.
sharing that. Kind of going into the next
Yeah.
question. Do you think that the idea of body positivity is one that's embraced in our culture?
I would say, actually, I don't know. Now I think so. Now I think a lot more than it has ever been. I think so.
Okay, so let's take the time to kind of explore that a little bit. So what makes you think that it has been celebrated or it is being celebrated more now than previous?
I think the way we dress as people have changed, right? From a male perspective, 10 years ago, wearing muscle shirts or just wearing, men are wearing, we're wearing like, kind of almost like our shorts almost look like little capris for a second. You know what I'm saying? Everything's a lot more tight fitting now than it has ever been. So,
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. I feel like, people are right now it seems like people are way more confident in
mhm,
their clothing choices and showing their bodies off. I think that the gym is something that's a lot more popular amongst my friend
yeah,
group now than it was about 10 years ago.
for sure.
And
For
so I
sure.
feel like when you put in that hard work in the gym or exercise or doing whatever it is that you do to stay fit, I think it gives people a new sense of confidence. So I kind of agree with what you're saying. To kind of think a little bit deeper, what would you say society's ideal body type is?
And that's a very interesting question. And I guess like the for men, the ideal body type is it's actually a very interesting concept because I think there's two ideal body types, right? And I think the first one is, oh, you gotta have a 6 pack, you gotta have the muscles, right? But I'm starting to hear about this, like the dad bods, right? Like the dad bods are in now. You know what I'm saying? And
Shout out to the dads and the dad bods out there.
facts. And honestly, as a person who's probably almost in between, I mess with that. You know what I'm saying? Um, and I think the other part, the ideal body type for women is just simply the Coke bottle shape, the exaggerated Coke bottle shape. I think that's the best way I can put that.
And I agree. I think this is the first time I've actually thought about there being two different ideal body types for men online on Instagram. You see the influencers out here, who look like they were born with a six pack. They have every muscle that has ever been created. They're usually about 6 feet tall, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
but then again, you're starting to see more people who are just comfortable in their skin, who don't look anything like that, also celebrating themselves. So to
yeah.
kind of go a little bit deeper, how do you think these ideal body types are promoted? So is it through TV? Is it through like action figures? Because every time that I picked up an action figure or my cousin picked up a Barbie, they seem to have like one body type. One, even the
Yeah.
Blob, who's an X-Men
Hmm.
character, a villain, who's supposed to be a
Yeah.
larger than life figure, was still chiseled a little bit.
Hmm.
I mean, I know we grew up in the hip hop era, looking at 106 in Park, the videos. And so how do you think the ideal body type was promoted?
Yeah, I think it was promoted a few ways. I mean, we're gonna if we start off with hip hop, right? One of my earliest things of hip hop was seeing Tupac, you know what I'm saying, with his shirt off, and then also as a person who watches wrestling, right? Like 6 feet tall, body buff dude, like he lift weights every 5 minutes, like that type of dude, like you know what I'm saying. And so, and then even to go to like basketball, football, like everybody is just big, right? Like that's just big and muscular. That's what the body type was promoted. You know what I'm saying it's really through TV. I think the same way. I mean, probably the same way with women, and I think that theirs is more like you said, like the Barbies, magazines, like Sports Illustrated, like
Okay. Okay. Yeah, like Sports Illustrated, right? When you look at the cover of Sports Illustrated, you can tell that photographers are good at their jobs, right? They're paid to make certain things appear a certain way. And so, thinking a little bit about growing up, like we kind of talked about TV, wrestling, sports. I think that the one thing that we didn't have to really deal with, that I think that a lot of people in the generations behind us, or even our generation, is dealing with now, is the influence of social media. So how do you think social media or influencers play a role in how we see ourselves and our bodies?
Yeah, I definitely think it's our version of TV in the 90s, right? Like I think, in the 90s and the 2000s, I think now not only are these people like on your screen, on your phone screen, but they're also relatable, right? Like they also give stories about what they do in the gym, or you see their journey in the gym, or with their bodies and things of that nature. So it does create new conversations, and it creates like it does give the comparison, like I mentioned earlier, like, oh yeah, I see that guy with that six-pack, what did he do to get the six-pack, let me go get that, you know what I'm saying. And so it is comparable to like our TV in the 90s. You can understand their story more,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
And I think the big difference between maybe 15, 20 years ago and today, like if you think about wrestling, because you mentioned wrestling a little bit, like all we had was Monday Night Raw and SmackDown. Monday Night Raw came on every Monday. So that's once a week that you're tuning in to wrestling on TV, and you're seeing these figures, these larger than life figures. And could some comparisons happen during that time? Absolutely. But again, it was just once a week. When you think about social media is everywhere, and it never goes off. Like I can't think about the last time that I actually logged out of my Instagram account. Right? I'm not on Instagram right now because we're recording a podcast, but my Instagram is very much live right now. And so when you think about the fact that 20 years ago things kind of went off, whereas now like kids are constantly being bombarded with images, or constantly being told and taught subconsciously sometimes and unconsciously at moments who they should be, or how they should present, or what's cool, what's in and what's not. I think it kind of creates, I don't know, it just creates a different feel for this generation, and even us who grew up in a different time, having to live through this new time or this new phenomenon that's going on right now. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So kind of transition a little bit, because we're going to talk about mental health coming up in a sec. But so as a therapist, what role do you think that society's addiction to social media plays to our overall mental health?
I think it does play a huge role now, right? And I see how it affects us. It can really mess with your psychosocial stages, right?
Okay.
Um, it can mess with your identity, right? Because, if your identity doesn't match what you see online, you can easily become depressed or anxious, or you can run into other body issues that you would have never had you not had Instagram or social media.
And that's a big point, right? Because I think that, I've heard somebody say that comparison is the thief of joy, right? And because social media is so prevalent right now, and it's something that never goes off, and images of are always being portrayed as the next thing. If you don't look like the things that you're used to seeing on a regular, I definitely can see that being a driving force behind people becoming insecure about their bodies.
Yeah. Yeah, no, seriously. It's a huge problem. It's definitely a huge problem.
And hopefully we can get to talking about a solution before we close out for the episode. But kind of thinking a little bit about mental health, how do you think society's understanding of mental health has changed over the past 10 years?
Oh man, it's actually very, very interesting. I think a lot of mental health disorders were not taken seriously, right?
Okay.
Like for instance, somebody says they're depressed, and 10 years ago, the thing would have been like, "Oh, you're depressed. Well, get over it." Right? "Oh, you have anxiety. Oh well, you still got to do these things." You were thought to be crazy if you had, mental health challenges, right? Now all of that is met with more empathy.
Okay. So would you say that people are more open to the idea of mental health, of talking to a therapist these days?
Oh, for sure, for sure. I think therapy is touching, and I'm going to speak about Black people. I think therapy is touching all the corners of the Black world slowly but surely, right? Like I think that there's still some growth, but I also think that there has been significant strides that therapy has done in the Black community within itself.
Okay. And so, like, what do you think has led to society, or maybe even our culture's newfound relationship with mental health?
I really think that people have started to see um, the before and after, right? I think people have started to see just how therapy really helps, how effective therapy is, how effective just like therapeutic techniques are, right? I think that has made people, and so it's almost like the word of mouth, right? It's a word of mouth. It's almost like in the Bible with Jesus, right? Like nobody knew who Jesus was until his reputation started following, right? And I think the same thing is with therapy, and in the mental health, and with mental health in the Black community.
Yeah, because I mean, for instance, so we talking about how therapy has been embraced. However, I know several people, several of our friends who aren't really as excited as many people are, as in starting therapy or focusing on their mental health. And I think one of the things that keep people from doing therapy, because how it's kind of viewed on like TV, right? Is somebody on a couch and a therapist asking you, how do you feel? Right? But it's so much more than that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times, and based on whoever you were parented by, right? Like if you were parented by the silent generation, if you were parented by boomers, if you were parented by Gen Xers, mental health and feelings were not a thing, right? And so, for us underneath that, for us being raised by that, we often need a safe space. Like, because sometimes friends just aren't the safe space that we need them to be. So we need somebody who's not that close to us to help us out with that.
I definitely understand that. I'm a millennial, right? And I grew up the only child, and I spent a lot of time by myself. So when I got an opportunity to jump off the porch, for lack of better words, to get outside, my safe space were my friendships. But as an adult, I'm kind of learning that there are certain issues that, one, you don't want to burden somebody else with who's not trained. And then
Mhm.
two, it's not always as beneficial to just vent. Sometimes you actually need people to ask you challenging questions so that you can begin to unpack it, right?
Yep, absolutely. And that's the thing, because I think, like you said, I think with friendships in particular, we are just here to listen, right? Like, or sometimes we don't necessarily take the next step, right? Just because, sometimes it's whether it's familiarity or just scared to keep going, or like not sure, actually not sure, not knowing what to do. Yeah, no, it definitely, man, it definitely is like it's challenging. And so yeah, no, I agree with you.
I mean, and so you mentioned the next step, because that's something that I don't really know what to do sometimes. Like if a friend tells me something in confidence that's really heavy and really serious, I'm really good at listening and repeating what they say and maybe lending some advice of what I would do. But if I've never been in that scenario, if I've never had that lived experience, sometimes I just don't know what to say. And you mentioned the next step. So what is the next step beyond just sharing something with a friend or a therapist for the first time? What does that next step kind of look like?
You know what? I think that, it depends on what you want it to be. It's whatever you want it to be, right? Like, let's say, for instance, you come into therapy and you talk about how you don't have any space in your relationship, right? Uh, the next step, once you get all those emotions out about how you don't have that, you go into your past and things of that nature. The next step is you, right? How can I enact this? What do I want this to look like? Honestly, you know what I mean?
Wow. Okay, real pause for a second. We gonna let that breathe. You said you just said the next step is you. And from personal
Hmm.
experience, because about 2 years ago, I found myself meeting with a therapist for the first time. And that's
Hmm.
exactly how it happened, right? I did an intake and I shared all of this personal information about myself. But once I got finished like venting and sharing some deep, intimate things about my life, my therapist really kind of reverted back to me and my childhood. And it's crazy how things that I would have never thought were related to my day-to-day life right now were impacted by a random experience that I had when I was 10 years old, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
man, it's really, man, it's really deep once you get to thinking about it. So kind of, shifting gears a little bit, because we talked about body positivity earlier, but I would say that the opposite of body positivity would be body dysmorphia. I did a little research, and body dysmorphia is also known as body dysmorphia disorder, BDD. Are you familiar with that at all?
Yeah. Hmm.
Can you
Absolutely.
talk to me a little bit about it, like what it is?
So I would say it is the hypervigilance on the flaws of your appearance. You noticing, oh man, I got a stretch mark. Like it's the hypervigilance and the hyper focus on body parts. It's almost in like in a compulsive way.
And talking about body dysmorphia, is how do you think that begins? Is it kind of talking about what we were talking about earlier, in a sense of people are comparing themselves to people that they subscribe to as body goals, and they, because they don't look that way, they often start
Hmm.
to compare themselves and to see what they have as negative?
I see it like this. I think there's a lot of ways that this can start, but I think one of the things that probably will be most prevalent, it starts in the home. A lot of distress starts within the home. So like, let's say for instance, you have a parent who's always you need to lose weight, right? Um that stuff sticks within your mind. Like that's the soil. Once you hear that, it just stays there. It stays with you and you never forget that.
Man, like that's deep. And it's crazy because like as an adult in my 30s and going to therapy, I think one of the things that's probably most surprising for me is that therapy has provided terms or definitions for things that I have been dealing with for my entire life, right? I just didn't really have the verbiage or the words to describe it. Also, being a millennial, counseling or in therapy wasn't something that I subscribed to earlier in life. And so, I'm looking at the definition of body dysmorphia, right? And it says, and you kind of hit it right on the nose, but body dysmorphia, also known as body dysmorphia disorder, BDD, is a mental health condition characterized by excessive thoughts about one's perceived flaws or defects in physical appearance. These perceived flaws are typically minor or even non-existent, but individuals with BDD become intensely preoccupied with them. And that just makes me think, and reading the definition, it just makes me think about, several moments in my life. I started balding really early, around like 20. And I met you around the time that this was happening. I don't know if you remember, like I used to go everywhere in a hat. What people
Oh my
what people
goodness.
don't know about me is that I actually hate hats. But because I was so insecure and I was so hyper focused on my hair and what it looked like or the lack thereof, right? It's
Mhm.
almost like controlled my life.
Yeah.
Also, just being transparent, I'm asking, you all to bear with me, but I'm gonna bear with you a little bit. I'm a diabetic. And
Mhm.
one of the symptoms of diabetes that is out of control is weight loss, right?
Mm.
And
Mhm.
I went through a period in my life, man, where I avoided people who were really close to me because everybody, if they hadn't seen me in a few months, they'd be like, "Oh man, you losing weight. You was already skinny." And I'm just like, "What?" And so I think in those moments, it could be from family, it could be friends. We began to develop this idea of how we look and become super focused on some of those. I've never been diagnosed with having body dysmorphia, but I'm reading the definition and I feel like myself and maybe a lot of others can relate. So, how do therapists work with clients or patients to kind of deal with that?
Well, I think there are many ways that, somebody could work through that. I think that, there's a couple of parts of this that have to be taken care of, right? And I think because it's almost like OCD, right? So the way you deal with OCD is that you also take care of the thoughts, you take care of the compulsions, and you take care and then so like from there also, um, that can be done by displacement, right? But to wrap all that up, I mean, really, sometimes it can be done by also personal exposure. So, oh, sorry, is it positive exposure? I think it's either positive exposure or personal exposure, where you're kind of working it out, right? And don't quote me on that word because I'm pretty sure, but it's a certain exposure you're doing with yourself, right?
Okay.
So really, it means like putting yourself in uncomfortable positions to work through the trauma, right?
Okay.
Kind of throwing yourself in the fire.
I mean, and look, bro, so for the listeners out there, right? Before I do an episode, I normally send a script. I did send Josh a script. We're going a little bit off script, so we're not expecting you, bro, to have every answer to these questions, but I just appreciate your context. I appreciate your insight. So I just didn't want you to feel
Sure.
like, man, I'm on camera. I gotta be able to spit everything out the way that I would if I was in my office and have studied. Because you do intake and you actually study these things in your private time, right?
Yeah, and that's the reason why I did answer because it's sorry, and the word is prolonged exposure.
Okay.
But
Okay.
literally, if I was actually not exposed to this on my job, I would not fully understand how stuff works, at least a little bit.
Okay.
So you ain't stretching me too bad yet.
Okay. Okay. So that's really dope, man. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head when you were talking about how you deal with body dysmorphia, and I just kind of think about how I've come to deal with my own insecurities, right? I grew up, and I've shared this story on the first few episodes. It was my introduction to pornography at a young age. I was really curious. I found ways to view things that I know now that I shouldn't have. My parents did everything they could at the time to kind of protect me and keep me innocent. But it's really hard to do that, for a kid like me who, if I wanted something, I found a way to get it. And I started to develop, insecurities about my body through that. And it wasn't until, I was at a clothing optional yoga class, and I literally had just made up my mind that I was tired of feeling a certain way about my body, and I needed to do something drastic to kind of counteract that. And so that looked like me going to a clothing optional yoga class and doing yoga for the first time, like butt naked, bro.
Wow.
We talked about this experience
Wow.
previously,
Yeah, for
in the
sure.
past, but
Mhm.
as a therapist, when you hear something like that, what do you think was happening in that moment?
I think of it as a sort of, I would see that as a form of freedom.
Okay. And so you're saying that people finding ways to feel free in their skin can kind of work against insecurity and anxiety that happens in the body?
Yeah. But I would say it has to be coupled by handling the thoughts and taking care of everything else that comes along with it though, and the beliefs. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, no, I think exploring definitely is a good way, because there's no way to show you're healed, right? There's no mandatory way to show that you're healed, right? Everybody's healing looks differently.
Okay. Okay. Because I think, a lot of people in the nudist community, right, they love to kind of say, because maybe this happened to them, they just strip their clothes off and all of, like, in 5 minutes, I feel great about myself and I learned to love myself. But from what
Hmm.
you're saying is that it's not just the action of, going to a nude beach. It's also maybe doing that and dealing with the negative thoughts that you had previously, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So since we've kind of already jumped in and I kind of used my story as a segue, this is the Bear With Me podcast. And on the Bear With Me podcast, the purpose is to have conversations centered around body positivity. I realized that once I started sharing and telling my friends and family that I was like a nudist, right? Like I was really out here living a nudist life, a lot of conversations kind of popped up. And these were conversations that before I shared that information, never really had the opportunity to really happen. And so I wanted to create a space on a podcast to really have those type of conversations. Like I think about me and you, bro, and I think about how long we've known each other. I think about, how much we know about each other, how deep and intimate our conversations have been over the years. And it wasn't until maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, after I had already been a nudist, man, for about 8 years, that I decided to tell you. So
Hmm.
I think that we're going to transition, into talking about nudism a little bit as somebody who's not a nudist, you kind of thinking about how that lifestyle could play a role in people seeing themselves differently. So real quick, so before we spoke about nudism back a few years ago, had you ever heard about it?
Kind of on and off, like, and I heard about it like through articles online and things of that nature. I even heard about it, surprisingly, through an episode of Rugrats, which was actually interesting. But, but no, yeah, no, I actually had heard a little bit about it. I didn't really know too much about the concept within itself after, other than things I heard about. But like, yeah, it's actually very interesting though.
Okay, so shout out to Rugrats. I think I know the episode you're talking about. Tommy was running around naked. Yeah, classic episode. But um, if you had to define nudism, what would you say that is?
I guess it would be just like kind of walking around in a nude, but like not like having nude be like a preferred way you show up, but like also not in a sexual way, right? Like I think, could be wrong.
Hey,
I definitely could be wrong.
listen, I didn't give you the definition beforehand, and I think you really summed it up, right? I don't think it's something that we have to
Mhm.
do this deep philosophical dive and exploring every aspect of the word, right? But I think that's exactly what it is. I think one of the misconceptions about nudity, because most times people are usually nude for very few reasons, right? To shower and to have sex. And nudism exists outside of both of those. Like, you don't necessarily have to be showering to consider yourself a nudist, and you don't have to necessarily be naked to have sex. So I
Right.
think you're right on. But kind of thinking about, the idea of people who may be self-conscious, who may have body dysmorphia. How do you think embracing a lifestyle like nudism could possibly help?
You can definitely see nudism as being a brave, like, and I would say this is a brave strategy, right? Like, it is, you not holding nothing back. You know what I mean? And so I think that I definitely think it could be helpful, right? Because hey, listen, this is who I am, this is how I'm coming, and I'm gonna show up regardless. You know what I mean? So yeah, no, I definitely think it kind of does help with body acceptance, because this all I got at this point.
Yeah, I mean, we out here, ain't we?
Yeah,
like I
facts.
think that's something. I mean, that's really that's really been my experience, right? I think it was in that moment I had kind of thought about it for years, like what it would feel like to, be on like a nude beach or something like that. But it was also something that was so far away from what I was willing and able to do, because I was still kind of held prisoner by some of the insecurities that had developed really early in my life. And I think
Mhm.
that it was in that moment where I showed up to the class, and it's like that put up or shut up moment. Like, either you're gonna do this or you're gonna go home wishing that you had.
Mhm.
And once I decided to do it,
Mhm.
I don't know. I feel like all the anxiety that I was feeling kind of disappeared. But it wasn't like an instantaneous thing, because before I'd ever went to that event, I'd actually spent a
Mhm.
year, of speaking positivity over myself, just becoming best friends with my mirror, kind
Mhm.
of unpacking where a lot of my insecurities started from, and just
Mhm.
deciding not to honor those anymore. So I think you're right. I love how you said that it's not just the simple act of undressing, but there's a part two. It's undressing coupled with dealing with the negative thoughts that you may have had about yourself. Doing a little research, the ANR website, that's AANR.com. That is like America's Nudist Association. Frequently
Mhm.
quote psychologists saying that some of the benefits of nudism is actually that it's a way that you can kind of fight anxiety, and it promotes relaxation.
Mhm.
Um,
Mm.
so what do you think about that? I'm asking a therapist.
It's very interesting because I could see that, like, I because I've never counseled anybody who's a nudist, but I could definitely understand why that works, right? Like, because if your worst fear is how your body looks, throwing you right in the water and just being like, well, I'm gonna show up to this nudist beach or whatever, and I'm just gonna be nude. I can see that being, because you are your full authentic self, right? Like, that's it. You are your full authentic self. Even if you are having those thoughts, those bad thoughts, you are your full authentic self, whether you like it or not, right?
Yeah,
Like, it's that exposure.
man. Okay, hey, you heard it from the therapist. He confirmed all of my sentiments and all the things that I believe. Now, seriously. So, man, here's the $1,000,000 question. You said you've been out in the gym. You cock diesel these days. Do you think that you could actually ever try a nudist experience, like whether that's going to a beach, whatever that may look like? Do you think that that's something that you could do?
You know, there's a lot of brave people in this world, and I ain't one of them. Like, like, I could, man. I listen. Shout out to all the people that are braver than me. I'm not that brave. I ain't gonna lie to you. I'm not that brave.
So here's my opportunity to be a therapist, and I'm not licensed, and yeah, I've never been to school, but how do you feel, right? Why not? Why do you think that you're not brave enough to try it?
I I don't know. Like I think it is one of those situations where I am very much a person who is used to dressing a little more conservative.
Okay. Okay.
And so and so it's not necessarily like a body, it's a culture thing for me. Like this isn't that's not necessarily how, I don't know, like that's not necessarily how I think about, I don't know, that does put a little fear. I ain't gonna lie to you. Like
Okay.
just because that's counterintuitive to how I think about it.
I think you brought up a really good point. And we've been going for almost an hour here, so we're gonna wrap up soon. But you talked about culture. And one thing as a sociologist, that I'm interested in is exploring culture and its impact on just the things we do. But I'm also kind of, as I'm talking to you, who's a fully licensed therapist, I'm also kind of curious about how culture can either be helpful or harmful to our mental health.
It's a good question. Like it can't, like it depends, man. Like I because I think there are certain topics within our community that get ostracized due to lack of research, right? And then there are like certain, because kind of like therapy, right? Therapy in the Black community wasn't even like real, like when we were kids, right? Like it wasn't even like a thing. You was ostracized if you was going to therapy. People would be like, "What's wrong with him? Why is he? Oh, he's just crazy." Da 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 da. Like ain't nothing going on. I think of it the same way of any other space, any other topics in the Black community that are not well researched.
And I agree, right? I think that a lot of times there are certain do's or don'ts that we subscribe to in culture because that's just how it's always been done. That's not something that my mother did, or that's what my mother did, and so I do the same thing. And so that was definitely my experience. Like nobody that I knew was a nudist or had ever like ventured out or talked about maybe being interested in their lifestyle, let alone openly talking about it. But it was something that I took a chance on. But the whole purpose of this podcast is not really for me to convince, my friends and family to necessarily try it or do it. I'm just more interested in just learning how people feel, how they think, and also to kind of share, other, like almost like to compare notes. So I chose nudism as my way to kind of find myself and to be most comfortable in my skin. But maybe you have done something different. So as a therapist, like what do you think are some helpful tools that people can use to be more present in their bodies and who they are?
Go to therapy. The first one. The first part is
just show up. Just okay.
Just show up. But I think, and I think the other part is find the issue of why we aren't present in our bodies, right? And I think the other part of it is finding what's comfortable or finding what's not comfortable and doing that.
Okay. So here, man, we getting ready to wrap up in a few minutes, man, a few seconds actually. But I definitely wanted to give you an opportunity to get the last word. So if you would like, just take a few minutes, well, not a few, I keep saying minutes, a few seconds to kind of plug our audience and just share what therapy has meant to you and why you think people should try it.
Therapy to me was the safe space that allowed people to get inside my mind that I don't allow people normally to get in, right? Like it was kind of one of those situations for me to talk about things that I'm embarrassed about and I didn't want to talk to nobody else about, or I was just ashamed, right? And I forgot the second part of this question. It was
so just take a second to kind of plug therapy. Like, why should people try it?
Honestly, I think why people should try it, I mean, simply for, if anything else, is to have a person who is here to validate you to help you organize your thoughts, right? I think two of those, I think those are the two most things that a lot of people don't have without somebody being biased towards them, if that makes sense.
And you said it. You're the therapist, so I have to take your word for it. Nah, but to that point, man, it's definitely what I've experienced in therapy. Is one of the best decisions that I've ever made in my adult life. So much so that I wish I would have done it 10 years, 15 years sooner. So if you are listening and you have been kind of contemplating, if you should try it, you heard Josh say it, just try it, right? You never know, what you would experience until you actually take a step forward and try it. But hey, bro, thank you so much again, man, for stopping by, for having a conversation with me, man. I really appreciate it. I'm sure our listeners are gonna love it. I can't wait to drop it. But with that being said, this is the Bear With Me podcast. I'm your host, Jay. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.